Initial Thoughts is a spoiler-free movie review series. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to Initial Thoughts, a series in which we talk about films as and when they're released. Today's film we're talking about is Babylon, which is directed by Damien Chazelle and stars Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie, and is described on IMDb as a tale of outsized ambition and outrageous excess. It traces the rise and fall of multiple characters during an era of unbridled decadence and depravity in early Hollywood. So going into Babylon, I'll admit I didn't know too much about the film. I seen one or two trailers, and the trailer kind of sold me on it, but didn't blow me away. But then I seen it was directed by Damien Chazelle, stars Margot Robbie, Brad Pitt, and that alone had me hooked. You know, we've had that conversation before about a director or some casting choices or a strong cast in general. Always hooks you to a film. If you see a lot of these ensemble cast films, there's usually that many. But even just some core brilliant actors and actresses, that can sell me totally on a film. And having a great director in Damien Chazelle, and who a lot of years back was not someone that was on my radar, or probably many people's radar, and then he had the two absolute smashes, which were La La Land and Whiplash, and in both of those films, the quality of both, they were just able to achieve so much, and he was able to achieve so much as director, and really put him on a pedestal now, and he wasn't just a good director working today. Those two showed the quality of what he can bring to screen. And a movie like Babylon, you know, this time period, as I say, about it being set in the kind of 1920s through to the 1930s period of the biggest transition cinema's had maybe ever, when it went from silent films to talking pictures, as you would call it. And that was the biggest change. And how I do feel that having someone like Damien Chazelle to direct this, there's not many I feel that could have done this better. So definitely the director choice was certainly a big selling point for me personally, and that was one of the biggest intrigues going into this film. Because of course I know the quality that Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie can bring to films, and also a good cast in general. You know, not only just them two, but we had people like Tobey Maguire in here in a limited role, we had Jean Smart, who also brings quite a lot, and in particular, a performance that I found that also was someone that I did not know. I have not any experiences of any of performances of this guy. I'm not someone that's watched Narcos, for example. But Diego Calva as Manny or Manuel Torres in this film was a real surprise, and I'll be very amazed if he doesn't get a real career amplification from this movie. I think he'll be in a lot of productions to come, and this will really kickstart it for him. And rightly so. He was enigmatic, he was charismatic, his dynamic with Margot Robbie throughout the film is definitely the core story beat, if you like. But let's talk about, because there has been a lot of people that they seem to be very mixed on this film. There's people that say Babylon's an absolute masterpiece. There's people that say Babylon is a complete waste of time. It's 3 hours you'll never get back. There's people in the middle. I think I lie. It's certainly not a masterpiece. But it's also not a waste of time. There's a lot that's achieved in Babylon. But these are my thoughts on why I think it's got that kind of reception so far. And while I think it's justified in some ways, the criticism, but also not totally. Because Babylon as a film has a brilliant start. There's a full party scene for the first kind of, I'd say, 45 minutes of the film, maybe not even that. And it's a brilliant introduction to the madness of this era of Hollywood. It's absolutely ludicrous, the party. It's a crazy party scene, but it brilliantly enables and enables us as the audience to get attached to a lot of the characters. Not by, this is who this is, and this is who that, you know, it's not. You get to know them through this party. You get to know their character traits, and by the end of that party scene, we're all very aware of who each role is, what their personality is like, what their dynamic is in Hollywood, and it's very clear, and it's done very well. So the opening scene is one of the better ones I've seen in a good while. I thought this film hooked me straight in. And also, and this is the one that's been probably the most contentious, which has been the closing scene of this film. Now, this film is 3 hours long. Just over 3 hours long. Does it need to be 3 hours long? I would say no. I would say you have a really brilliant 2 hours 20 to 2 hours 30 minute film here, but it overstays his welcome. But is that because of the ending? No, actually. And not for me personally. I know a lot of people say the ending drags on and drags on, but I found the ending of actually quite emotional. This kind of just where cinema is, and that's as vague as I'm going to give you about that, because I'd like you to see it for yourself, and of course make your own judgments on films, as we always chat about. But for Babylon, I think my critique, if this had a more coherent story. Yes, there's a story about cinema. Of course there is. But this feels like just a collection of scenes, if you understand what I mean. The start of it with a party scene. And then there's another scene. There's another character does whatever. And then it just kind of is this, and then this, and then this, and then this. There isn't a kind of flow-through line of storytelling. There is, there's a lot to see and a lot to enjoy in these kind of isolated scenes, but all put together, it's a bit, in a strange way, it's overwhelming and underwhelming, because I think if there was more of a coherent, and I am, if you've been on the channel for a while, I'm a sucker for storytelling, and it's something that always I do look for an emotional story. And yes, as I say, this movie's like bookends. A great start that enables the characters and it engages us with the characters. But the problem is that the party scene for the start, that is great. And there's a lot of scenes throughout the film that is great. There's not actually, I don't ever think I find myself, I don't think bored would be the right word, but I don't think I ever felt myself checked out or unengaged, even with the run length. Although, certainly as we came to kind of what you would call the final act, I did notice the runtime a little bit. But the pacing is actually pretty good of this film. It's a strange one because each scene and everything that's happening, there isn't a part where it's dull. There isn't a part where people aren't giving their best. I think it's just how it's structured. It isn't structured in the most digestible way as a film, if you get what I mean. And if you've seen the film, I would hope you would understand what I mean by that, because that is my biggest critique of Babylon. Not that the film itself isn't great. It won't be, and obviously we're only halfway through the review, but it won't be getting a real top tier score because of that and because of my love of storytelling. But, the scene setting they do throughout the film and the actual time period and the subject matter of the plot is an engaging one. It's an interesting one. And as a movie lover, myself, I'm sure you guys are as well in some form or another, it's good in that way. However, the problem comes with the general movie-going audience, I would imagine, and that's where the critique comes from. I think if you're not, head over heels in love with cinema as a whole, you might not really see the value in Babylon. Because it's clear to see what their message is. It's clear to see what they want to achieve. It's obvious of what the message is. It's not like, it isn't a story. It's not like it isn't clear of what the point of the film is, although that's always a strange argument if you ever say what's the point of a movie, you could say that about literally any film that's ever been made, so that argument doesn't really hold up, because I've heard people say that. What was the point of Babylon? Like, what's the point of anything? It's an escapism. And they actually do, there's a lot of really touching and poignant scenes in this film that I liked a lot, which were kind of the legacy that actors and directors and people that are involved in cinema, long when they're gone, they'll live on through their great films, and that's their legacy will always be intact long after they aren't about. And I liked a lot of the messages about cinema as a whole. But as I say, I don't know how well that would translate to people who aren't head over heels for the cinema. But Babylon had a lot to offer. It had a lot to offer. It's just that story bit is always going to be the falling down point for me. And, a cohesive story is so vital, I think. But before we approach rating time, I do want to mention a few more little things about what I did like about Babylon. And one thing that definitely stood out to me, and I don't always mention this because it isn't always a memorable thing in cinemas. There's a lot of films that I would see that aren't in any way memorable in this aspect, but the score of Babylon the musical production and the theme of the film is actually quite brilliant. It brilliantly encapsulates the time period. It adds so much depth to what's going on in the scene, and that's what a good score does. We've talked about score before in different iterations of big epic films or very low scale films. There's always a score can really amplify a scene, and the score in Babylon is one of the better ones I've seen in a while. I went straight home and went on Spotify and looked up the soundtrack. It is it's one of my favourite scores of the last maybe year, maybe even 2 years. It's right up there. So that's something that definitely stood out to me. And I just want to touch on, just before we get to rating time, a little bit more on the performances. Because I talked about, Diego Calva there and Manny Torres. But let's talk a little bit about Margot Robbie, who I would imagine is in for another big year, as if she hasn't had about 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 massive years now. Ever since kind of Wolf of Wall Street, she has been nearly the forefront of female actresses at this point. Because obviously Brad Pitt being the other lead, if you like. I think the 3 leads, although it's obviously billed mainly as Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt being the known actor and actress of this film. But Diego Calva, obviously, you would say is the 3rd lead of the film, or maybe it's the lead of the film overall. But Margot Robbie in particular, because Brad Pitt kind of gives a great performance, similar to something like Inglourious Basterds, where he's not the standout performer by any means, but brings a lot to the role. I thought him as Jack Conrad in Babylon was one of his more enjoyable performances of the last while. Because the last thing I seen Brad Pitt in would have been Bullet Train last year, which I did enjoy him in, but I don't know that he was the thing that made me enjoy Bullet Train that much. People more like Aaron Taylor Johnson, I think, in that film really stood out to me more than Brad Pitt, even though he was the lead. In this role, certainly in this role as Jack Conrad, I think he certainly is the 3rd most engaging character, because it would have been Diego Calva. But Margot Robbie, let's get back to her, because she brings so much. This is one of her most, maybe, what would be the word? Because there's so much variety to what she brings as Nellie Leroy in Babylon. She brings so much vulnerability, but she also brings an absolute party-going mad woman at times. It's quite a contrast, and it really shows a lot of her range. So her performance in particular, I think for me personally, was the one that blew me away. Because yes, I've seen her in a lot of things in the last 10 years, as I'm sure you have too. But I don't know that I wouldn't say this is her best by any means, but it's right up there in recent memory. I think she's really good in this, and that also brings a lot. So, don't get it twisted. Just because it isn't a coherent story didn't mean that I didn't like Babylon. I understand the criticism, and I understand why people don't love this film. But saying that it's a waste of 3 hours is no, that's not something I agree with. I think Babylon was a great cinema experience. Does it extend its welcome, or overstay its welcome, I should say? Yes, it does. By about maybe half an hour, maybe even 40 minutes too long. I think you could have had the same even more of a coherent story. Trim a little bit of the scenes and just fine-tune it a little bit, because the bookends are great. The start of the film and the end of the film, for me personally, I really enjoyed. I like that. I like the message that they're going for and the significance of this time period in cinema. I'm all for it. I just think that there's a lot of filler, for lack of a better term, in the middle of the film that kind of bulks up that runtime for not too much reason. I thought that it isn't really a necessary thing to have this as a 3-hour film. As I said before, 2 hour 30, maybe even 2 hour 20, you've got it's bumping up into that top tier of cinema making in recent memory. But overall, all that taken in, the lack of a cohesive story, the runtime being slightly too long, but also all the things I did like. Let's get to rating time. As you can see, IMDb has been not too bad with them. It seems quite fair enough. I'm actually going slightly lower than IMDb though. They've given it a 7.6. I'm going for a 7. I think there's enough quality here to warrant the 7. And there's a lot of stuff to really enjoy, as I've mentioned. But I think I couldn't even bump it up to a 7.5 because the runtime does knock down a bit of the quality. The lack of cohesion, as I've said a few times, is not something that I'm a fan of personally, but as a fan of film in general, I'm a fan of Babylon, and I liked a lot of what it did. It's not only just a great David Gray song, it's now an enjoyable movie experience too. So it's a win-win. So that's been my initial thoughts for Babylon. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to me. It's the first initial thoughts video of the year. We've got more to come. As you can see, there's a slightly new template with a trailer and things, so that's going to be continuing. We've got a lot of movies coming out into February, March, all the way up to Easter, and we have a lot coming out this year. As I said before the change of the year there, that I looked at 2022 and we had a lot of good films, and I thought, surely 2023 won't be that great. And then I looked through the list, and there's a hell of a lot of good films coming out this year. Will they be good? Will they be flops? Will they be a waste of time? Who knows? Who knows? But on a final thought of Babylon, I just want to say there's a great moment in this film, and it's not really a spoiler. It's just a part about, and I kind of touched on it there a little bit, but it's how I just want to end this review, which is it's a meeting with Brad Pitt's character and a journalist, and it's about kind of the middle of the film, and they talk about the legacy of actors and when they're gone. And I mentioned that earlier when I was talking about some of the significance, and that was the scene that really touched with me. And there was a lot of things that in this film that I, as a movie lover, and again I'm sure a lot of you guys are as well in some form or another, whether that be the big blockbusters, whether that be more of the indie and the niche films, or just a mixture of both. I think there's so much to love of cinema, and that was something that clearly shone through the screen of Babylon, and it reminded me why I love the cinema. And in line with that, not only loving the cinema and loving movies, and I just enjoy doing this. I enjoy sitting, going through and talking about these movies. And if you enjoy listening to me talk about movies, I appreciate you so much for taking time out of your day at all. But if you want to stick around, subscribe, leave a like, let me know you enjoyed it, that would be so beautiful. And if you do, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye, guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.